OK, time now to take a closer look at some of the stories in Behind the Headlines. Well, The Telegraph reports on one of our main stories. The security forces in Haiti have killed 4 people and detained 2 other suspects connected to the assassination of President Jovenel Moise. Hours before a deadline, the South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, hands himself over to custody to begin a 15-month jail sentence for contempt of court. African News website has that story there. And then reports coming in from North Korea to say that the harsh lockdown there is leading to extreme hunger. Yet the Middle Eastern newspaper, The Levant, says that the country has rejected a vaccine offer from Russia. And Britain's The Telegraph has more on England's historic football victory over Denmark. You can't have missed it yesterday. But has the media coverage been a bit too nationalistic? Well, my reviewers today will be able to tell me. Broadcaster and journalist Lape Olorinoye and the author and broadcaster Gavin Esler. Thank you both very much indeed for joining me. Let's start with you, Lape, and this story about Haiti. Yesterday, this time, in the aftermath of the assassination, we were hearing from a shocked nation. No one could quite believe that gunmen could go into the president's house and shoot him dead, and the First Lady unconscious, not knowing what state she is and what still, even now, what condition she's in. 24 hours on, the newspaper coverage is less shocked and more angry, isn't it?
Jeff, just because of the way in which this has played out, the fact that, what they've been described as mercenaries, it's still something that's quite bizarre. People can't get their heads around it. And also the breach of security. There are just so many different elements to this story, particularly the fact that non-Creole or French-speaking mercenaries managed to breach security and get into the president's house and kill him and essentially shoot him 12 times, leaving his wife in critical but stable condition, as it's been described. So it's extremely shocking. And of course, if I was also a Haitian, I would be livid as well, because this just speaks of the national security. I mean, if the president can't be protected, what more of the everyday citizen?
Absolutely. Let's move on to Jacob Zuma and let's bring Gavin into this. This is an indelible stain on the ANC, isn't it? And of course, an indelible stain on his own character. What do you make of this, Gavin?
It's a huge moment for South Africa. I mean, just imagine, this is the man who was president of the country. He's 79 years old. He's going to jail for 15 months. And of course, the jails in South Africa, although he'd be treated, they say, like every other prisoner, an old man where there's coronavirus in jails, it's not looking good. On the other hand, the list of charges against him going back right to 2005, which were either dismissed or they couldn't find ways of prosecuting, are quite extraordinary. 2005, charged with rape, charged with corruption. 2009, he became president, of course. 2016, he used public money to refurbish his house, but he repaid the money. 2017, more corruption questions and more charges. And then 2021, a jail sentence for not testifying before an inquiry. So you'd have to ask, what does he have to hide? And there's also charges of going back to 1999 about rather dodgy arms dealing. So these inquiries, this is so important for South African democracy. It has to prove that no one is above the law. And Mr. Zuma, former President Zuma, has appeared to be above the law for quite a long time.
Lape, we were hearing a few years ago these stories of Nkandla, his grand home there, that he's building swimming pools and tennis courts and everything. And he's saying, oh, it's just for security. But of course it isn't. It was for his own personal benefit. He's been doing this for a long time and getting away with it, hasn't he?
Well, allegedly, and getting away with it. But, Zuma has diehard supporters who are part of the ANC and are also regular people in South Africa. In fact, so much so that they formed a human shield around this same Nkandla country home that you talk of to protect him from the police arresting him. And that is really because South Africa has been through a very tumultuous time. Their history is one, although modern, is still changing and evolving. And if we look back into the horrors of apartheid which were championed by people like P.W. Botha and Mr. de Klerk as well, who didn't have to face the long arm of the law of South Africa, or even go to prison for their crimes against humanity. And a lot of the supporters feel like if they didn't go to prison for a lot of the crimes they committed against the Black people of South Africa, then why should former President Jacob Zuma? As Gavin just rightly said there, a lot of these cases have been building up right back to 1999, but he's managed to get out of it and wriggle his way out of it. So this time, many people would argue that this is a huge time for the democracy of South Africa, the fact that nobody is above the law and there will be no impunity. At the same time, though, many people, as you can see right there, are really angry about this, about the fact that a former president, one that was a freedom fighter, one that liberated South Africa and was part of the armed wing of the ANC, is now, going to prison for something that could have really been resolved through the due process.
Well, yes, I mean, I can take the point that this shows that nobody's above the law. But Gavin, you and I are old enough to remember 30 years ago when Nelson Mandela did that graceful and dignified long walk out of prison, out from Robben Island, out into the nation and out into power. Who would have thought 30 years later that his successor, another ANC president, would end up in jail on corruption charges? What do you think Mr. Mandela would have made of this?
Well, Mandela was a great healer. I mean, he is the man who appeared in the Springbok shirt in the Rugby World Cup in the 1990s, saying essentially this is a new South Africa, and it is a new South Africa, and it's got its failings, but it's got some great opportunities. And the one thing I would say is that it is very difficult in any country for those who were leaders of a first-generation liberation struggle to end up in jail, because they are, as we were just hearing, they are such heroes to so many people. And the fact that South Africa feels confident enough to do it, I think, is quite a big step. I mean, it didn't happen in Zimbabwe with Mugabe, but it is happening now in South Africa. And even if he only serves a very short time, because he is an old man, it will still be a very important symbol that the liberation struggle is great. There are other problems, and one of them is corruption, which we have to tackle. That seems to be the message that's coming from South Africa tonight.
Okay, let's move on to a completely different regime in every way possible, North Korea. Lape, North Korea has refused offers of vaccines in the past. China's offered them vaccines. Russia is now offering them vaccines. They're saying no. Why?
Which North Korea works. It's a country that doesn't want interference, especially from the West. And this is a perfect example of that. There seems to be a notion of fear from North Korea about the interference of a possible vaccine rollout in that country. And because the borders have been closed for so long and they have very harsh lockdown restrictions there, that means that there's, the potential of a famine. I mean, 860,000 tons of food have gone to waste because of this, because their main food source is from China and they can't get that in anymore. But it does seem as though they do have a solution. Sergei Lavrov has offered the vaccine and has reiterated that the vaccine can be sent out to North Korea, but they're insisting no at the cost of the lives of their citizens. And there is really no other plausible argument other than the fact that because it's foreign and because it involves a lot of interference and exporting and importing, that notion of fair. And it will take a while for North Korea to get over that or move away from that because it's the way the country has been built and the precedents that they've set. So it's interesting to know, though, that they will allow the lives of their citizens essentially waste away because of this rhetoric.
I mean, Kim Jong-un, Gavin, has warned. He's gone on public television in something that was totally unprecedented and said, look, you need to prepare yourself for the worst possible outcome. I mean, what a thing for a leader to say to his people, especially when it's something that is caused by the fact that they've closed down the borders. I mean, I've spent some time in North Korea, and one of the things that I noticed there is that wherever you go, every available little bit of land is taken up by crops. If there's a little bit on the side of the road, by the pavement, a little bit of grass, they'll be growing crops there. The growth of crops is so vital to their very life. If the crops fail this year, if there are problems with the crops, and there have been all sorts of weather conditions over the last few months that mean that there could well be these problems, we're going to see a whole nation starve to death, aren't we, Gavin?
Well, what we're seeing is what happens when ideology and reality collide. And the ideology is self-reliance. Self-reliance has been the watchword of the regime for many, many years as a kind of hereditary presidency that goes back many, many years. And the trouble is, we live in an interconnected world. As we see with coronavirus, you can't just put up a border and be self-reliant when you haven't got when your crops fail, and you certainly can't be self-reliant when you have this terrible virus which is affecting all of us. And I'm hearing from some sources there that one of the in South Korea, that one of the reasons they may be a bit worried about taking in some vaccines is they haven't got the refrigeration systems and the infrastructure necessary to make sure it works. So they have got a real problem. And it would appear that if this is a choice between keeping to the ideology of the regime and keeping people fed, they choose the ideology.
But Lape, that ideology is incredibly popular, isn't it? I mean, you cannot underestimate the popularity of Kim Jong-un and the whole of the Kim dynasty, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il. They are the statues throughout the whole country. They're worshipped almost as gods, aren't they? And nothing seems to touch them, even them saying, look, you all might die for food scarcity. That still doesn't seem to affect the popularity, does it?
Well, I'm not sure that popularity is...
I'm not sure I'd use the word popularity. It's more, brainwashing, isn't it? Or if some other people have described it as Stockholm syndrome. I mean, for you to be able to be obsessed and worship and adore a leader and a family that essentially, and a dynasty, if you like, that essentially oppress its people and restrict its people of the freedom of information, a lack of functioning economy, and so on. So I wouldn't describe it as popularity somewhat. I would steer towards more, brainwashing and completely taking over their minds with a very interesting ideology. I'll say that much.
I love the fact that you both talked at exactly the same time and said the same thing. That is extremely clever of you both. Let's move on to the last story now. The football. I don't know whether you noticed there was a match on yesterday. When I came home from work on the train, of course, it was loud, there was noisy, there was singing. It always worries me when people don't say England, they say England. That, for me, is when you're in trouble. It's a fine line, isn't it, between being patriotic and supporting your country and supporting England and it being something a little bit more frightening. What do you make of this, Gavin? Do you think that people are being a bit po-faced when they're saying, oh, this is all getting a bit too nationalistic? Should we just, for once in a while, allow ourselves to be proud of being British, English?
Well, you've just given the game away there, you see, because I'm Scottish, so I'm British, but I'm not English. But I'm delighted by the England football team. I think they're brilliant. I think they look like us. They reflect our society. They're from all different backgrounds, and they are just terrific. And the manager's terrific. And that's patriotism, to say that this is something that is about us. We're good. Where it gets nasty is when it slopes off into a kind of toxic nationalism, which led some of the England fans not only to boo their own team for taking the knee, but also to boo the German national anthem and the Danish national anthem. Now, I think that is completely lacking in respect. And that's the problem. I think the team are fantastic. Some of the fans need to grow up, I think, and just think how they are seen around the world. And some of them are not seen in a very good light.
But Lape, is it childish? Is it disrespectful, really? If you've had a few beers, you've gone down to Wembley, you're watching the game, and the German national anthem comes on, and you boo. It's all a bit of fun, isn't it? Really, you're just supporting your team, surely.
I certainly don't think that's a bit of fun. I think the whole idea of sportsmanship is to be able to understand that it's all a game and that you respect the other side. I mean, even the footballers at the end of the game swap shirts as a way of paying their respect and showing some sort of camaraderie. So the fans should also take a leaf out of that book and also emulate that kind of behavior. After all, that is what sports is all about. But if we look at nationalism, I think Gavin hit the nail on the head there. There's a distinct difference between being British, which of course myself and Gavin are, and being English. And then that's kind of where the murky waters lie. And of course, London being one of the most diverse parts of England, it's interesting to see that even then we're having fans booing their own team members for taking the knee, something that has been very controversial for the entire season of football. But even deeper into that, the men of the match, as it were, are people like Raheem Sterling, who have essentially carried this team through this tournament, and even underdogs like Bukayo Saka, who have carried this team throughout this tournament, are not being, as championed as, let's say, Captain Harry Kane. And I think that's where the discrepancies lie. The fact that, are we celebrating people like Harry Kane and Mason Mount and even Grealish? I've completely forgotten his first name. My football knowledge isn't that great, but even people like those guys, are they being celebrated just because we're making this a national thing? But actually, there's love and unity in patriotism, and that's what we've seen. All the different celebrations that we've seen across the country. So yeah, there's a huge difference between being British and English, and this game has shown that.
Lapi, just run me through the offside rule, if you wouldn't mind. No, only kidding. Let's move on to Gavin instead. No, me neither. It's a game of two halves. That's the only intelligent thing I can say on the subject. Gavin, you're writing a book on the subject, aren't you? English nationalism. Tell us about that.
Well, I've just published it, actually. It's called How Britain Ends, English Nationalism and the Rebirth of Four Nations. And I'm not recommending that Britain ends, but the four different parts of the United Kingdom, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales and England, are all pulling in different directions, not just about Brexit. They all vote for different political parties. In Scotland, it's the SNP. In Northern Ireland, it's the DUP, Democratic Unionists. In Wales, it's Labour. In England, it's the Conservative Party. And we haven't really thought through what Britishness means in the 21st century, if anything. We've reinvented ourselves for 400 years, every 100 years or so. I just suggest that maybe we should have a little think about it and continue to celebrate our differences and our great football teams, but actually think, what does bring us together?
Gavin Esler and Lapi Ononore, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, that's it from this edition of Behind the Headline.